The scrape of a chair against hardwood silenced every conversation at the table. My father stood slowly, the way men do when they want the room to feel the weight of what's coming. He lifted his wine glass, smiled the smile he used at work when he was about to deliver news someone wasn't going to like, and looked directly at me. "I want to make an announcement," he said. "Since we're all together, Claire is going to help Derek get back on his feet. She's agreed to co-sign his new lease and cover his outstanding balance at the dealership." He paused, nodding once like it was already settled. Family takes care of family. 31 people heard that. My aunts, my uncles, my cousins, my grandmother and her good pearls. Every single one of them turned to look at me with warm, approving eyes, already nodding along, already grateful on Derek's behalf. I had not agreed to anything. My name is Claire Hartwell. I'm 32 years old, a senior financial analyst at a firm downtown, and for the better part of a decade I had been quietly, dutifully, invisibly keeping my younger brother's life from completely collapsing. That evening, sitting at my father's birthday dinner in his oversized dining room, surrounded by a family that had never once asked what it cost me, I finally understood something I should have understood years earlier. They were never going to stop. Not unless I made them. I set my fork down. I folded my hands on the table. I smiled the same way my father had smiled. Calm and deliberate, and I said, loud enough for all 31 people to hear. I don't remember agreeing to that. The table went very quiet. My father's smile flickered. He lowered his glass an inch. "Claire," his voice carried the particular warning tone he'd been using on me since I was 8 years old, the tone that said, "Don't embarrass me in my own house." "I'm serious," I said. "I never agreed to co-sign anything or cover anything. I'd like to know when that decision was made." My stepmother, Sandra, reached over and touched my father's arm. "Let's not do this tonight," she murmured, meaning let's not let Claire do this tonight. But I was done letting things slide for the sake of someone else's comfort. I looked at Derek across the table. He was 30 years old, broad-shouldered, good-looking in the easy way that had always gotten him out of things. He was staring at his plate. He had not looked at me once since my father stood up. That told me everything I needed to know about how much he'd known in advance. Here is what the people at that table did not know, because I had never told them. I had never told them because I had been raised to believe that keeping the peace was more important than telling the truth, and I had believed that for so long it had become a reflex. The same way breathing is a reflex. I had been paying for Derek since I was 24. Not loans. Not here and there help. Systematic, recurring, quietly negotiated transfers that had become as regular as rent. His first apartment deposit when he got evicted from student housing senior year. His car insurance for 14 months when he lost his job at the marketing firm. The credit card balance he'd run up to $8,000 and called me crying about at 2 in the morning, begging me not to tell our father. The medical bill from the ER visit he didn't want on his record. 3 months of groceries when he was between jobs, which became 6 months, which became a conversation where he told me he was thinking of starting a consulting business, and could I just hold on a little longer? I had held on. I had always held on. The consulting business lasted 4 months. When I look back now, what I cannot explain to people who haven't lived it is how gradual it was. There was never a single moment where someone sat me down and said, "You are responsible for your brother's failures." It was assembled piece by piece, one emergency at a time, until the architecture was so complete that I couldn't see it anymore. It just felt like family. It just felt like what you did. My father had a theory about Derek that the whole family shared. Derek was sensitive. Derek had struggled after our mother left when we were kids. Derek needed more runway than other people. More patience, more time to find his footing. My job, without anyone ever stating it plainly, was to be the soft landing at the end of every fall. What no one seemed to notice or care to notice was that I had also grown up without our mother. I had also struggled. I had also had years where I wasn't sure who I was or where I was going. The difference was that I had never been allowed to make it anyone else's problem. The birthday dinner was in October. I had driven 40 minutes to be there after a 60-hour work week. I had brought my father a nice bottle of scotch and a card I had actually spent time choosing. I had sat down at his table hungry and tired and genuinely glad to see my grandmother, who was getting older and whose presence I no longer took for granted. I had not come there to be announced. My father recovered quickly. That was one of his skills. He laughed, low and easy, the way people laugh when they want to reframe something uncomfortable as a misunderstanding. "We talked about this last week," he said. "On the phone, we talked about the possibility of me helping," I said. "I told you I'd think about it. I didn't say yes." Claire. Sandra again. The tone people use with children who are making a scene. "I'm not trying to ruin anyone's evening," I said. "I just want the record to be accurate." My Uncle Gerald, who had never once in my adult life asked me a single question about myself, leaned forward with his elbows on the table and said, "Your brother needs you right now. This isn't the time for, what does he need exactly?" I asked. "I want to understand specifically what we're talking about." Silence. Because no one at that table, I realized, actually knew. They knew the headline "Derek is struggling. Claire needs to help," but they had never been given the details, because the details were embarrassing. The dealership balance my father had casually mentioned was $11,000. I knew this because Derek had texted me about it 2 weeks earlier in a long message full of apologies and promises. The apartment he wanted me to co-sign was in a building that required a co-signer because Derek's credit score was low enough to disqualify him on his own. I knew this because I had asked. I was the only one who ever asked. I pushed back my chair, picked up my wine, and said, "I'm going to step outside for a minute." Nobody stopped me. I stood on my father's back porch in the October cold with my arms crossed and my mind very, very clear. The yard lights were on. I could see the garden Sandra kept, neat rows of dead stalks she hadn't cleared yet. I stood there for a long time, long enough for the noise inside to resume, long enough for someone to find me. It was Derek. He came outside without a jacket, hugging himself against the cold, and he stood next to me without speaking for almost a full minute. Then he said, "I didn't know he was going to do it like that." "But you knew he was going to do it." A pause. "Yeah. So, you let him." He didn't answer that. "Derek," I said, "what is your plan?" "Not the version you told Dad, the actual plan." He looked at the yard. "I've got some leads. There's a company in Riverside that reached out about a sales position." "That's not a plan. That's a lead." "What happens if it doesn't come through? What happens to the lease I co-signed? What happens to my credit when you miss a payment?" "I'm not going to miss a payment. You have missed a payment on every single financial obligation you have had in the last 6 years," I said. Not cruelly, just factually. "I'm not saying that to hurt you. I'm saying it because it's true, and everyone in that room is pretending it isn't." He flinched. "Things are different now." "How?" He didn't have an answer. He never had an answer. He had the feeling that things were different, the belief, the wish, but when I pushed past the feeling to the mechanics, to the actual plan, there was nothing there. There had never been anything there. And because there had never been consequences that stuck, there had never been a reason to build anything. I went back inside. I finished dinner. I hugged my grandmother at the end of the night and told her she looked beautiful, because she did, and because I meant it. I kissed my father on the cheek and told him, "Happy birthday." I drove home in the dark with the radio off. By the time I parked in my garage, I had made a decision. The next morning, my phone started early. My father called at 8:15. I let it go to voicemail. He left a message that started with "I don't understand what happened last night" and ended with "Call me back when you're ready to be reasonable," which was his standard construction for conversations where I had failed to agree with him. Sandra texted at 9. "Your father is very hurt. He was just trying to help your brother." At 9:40, Derek called. I picked up. "I need to know if you're going to help me or not," he said. No greeting. "Because if you're not, I have to figure something else out and I need to start now." I appreciated the directness, at least. "I'm not going to co-sign the lease," I said. A long exhale. "Claire. And I'm not covering the dealership balance. I don't have $11,000. "I know. So, what am I supposed to do?" "I think you should talk to a financial counselor," I said. "Seriously. Someone who can look at your actual income and your actual debt and help you build something real. I'll pay for those sessions if you go." "I don't need a counselor. I need money." "I know, but I've been giving you money for 8 years and you still need money. So the money isn't fixing the problem." He hung up. The call I had been bracing for came that afternoon. My father, voice tight, controlled, using his full register of disappointment. He told me Derek was spiraling. He told me the dealership was going to send the account to collections. He told me that family was not a transaction, it was a commitment, and I seemed to have forgotten that. I let him talk. When he finished, I said, I want to ask you something. When Derek's consulting business failed, did you look at the financials? A beat. What does that have to do with? He ran up $42,000 in business debt in 4 months. Did you know that? Silence. Half of it is still outstanding. There are 2 creditors who have been calling his phone for over a year. He told me about it in pieces, over about 6 months, because he was embarrassed. I've been covering the minimum payments on one account to keep it from going to collections. The other one I don't have visibility into anymore. I paused. I'm telling you this because I want you to understand that the $11,000 at the dealership is not the whole picture. It's just the part Derek was willing to show you. My father was quiet for a moment. Then, why didn't you tell me any of this before? Because Derek asked me not to. And because every time I've raised concerns about Derek in the past, you've told me I was being too hard on him. He didn't have a response to that. I love Derek, I said. But co-signing his lease means that if he misses a single payment, my credit takes the hit, not his. Mine. And given his track record, which I have been closer to than anyone in this family, I am not willing to take that risk. You're his sister. I know, and I've been acting like it for 8 years. I heard him breathe. In, out. The way he breathed when he was recalibrating. We'll talk later, he said, which meant when you've come to your senses. I didn't hear from him for 4 days. What I did during those 4 days was something I should have done years earlier. I sat down with my own records. Not Derek's mine. I pulled every transfer, every Venmo, every check I had written going back to when I was 24. I made a spreadsheet, not to use as a weapon, but because I needed to see it clearly. I needed the number to be real. The number was $93,000. I sat with that for a long time. $93,000 over 8 years. Broken down into categories: housing, automotive, medical, legal, debt service, and a column I labeled miscellaneous, which was everything else the grocery runs. The birthday dinners I paid for. The times he'd called needing cash by morning and I'd transferred it without asking questions because asking questions made me feel like I was failing him somehow. I wasn't angry when I looked at it. I was something colder than angry. I was clear. I also did something else. I called the bank and asked about the joint account my father had asked me to open with Derek 3 years earlier, supposedly to make transfers easier. I had almost forgotten about it. I had stopped using it after 6 months because it had felt uncomfortable, a checking account with my name on it that Derek had access to. What the bank told me was not what I expected. There had been activity on that account as recently as 6 weeks ago. 3 withdrawals I had not made. The total was just over $4,000. I asked the representative to read me the transaction details. She did. I wrote them down. I thanked her and hung up and sat very still at my kitchen table with the pen still in my hand. Then I called a lawyer. The lawyer's name was Patricia, and she had a small office near downtown that specialized in family financial disputes. I had found her through a colleague who had been through something similar with a business partner who was also a family member. Patricia had a way of explaining things that stripped out all the emotion and left only the structure, which was exactly what I needed. I brought my spreadsheet. I brought the bank statements. I told her everything. She was quiet while she reviewed the documents. Then she said, "The joint account activity is the most serious issue here. The other transfers were voluntary on your part, which limits your legal options. But unauthorized withdrawals from a joint account are different. What does that mean in practice? It means you have grounds to act. Whether you want to pursue that legally is your choice. But the first thing I'd recommend regardless is closing that account immediately and separating your name from any shared financial instruments." I hadn't known there were other shared instruments. That was the next conversation. The one where Patricia walked me through what I had signed over the years without fully understanding what I was signing. The joint account. A co-signer arrangement on a car loan from 4 years ago that I had been told was resolved, but that had a remaining balance I hadn't known about. My name on a utility account for an address I had never lived at. Each item landed like something falling from a height I hadn't measured. "How did this happen?" I said. Not quite a question. "Gradually," Patricia said. "It almost always does." I authorized her to begin the separation process. Every account, every instrument, every place my name appeared next to Derek's or my father's without my full understanding. It took 3 weeks and cost me more in legal fees than I wanted to think about, but I paid them without hesitation because the alternative was continuing to be a financial liability. I didn't even know I was. The fallout was not quiet. My father called the morning Patricia, sent the formal notifications. His voice was a register I had never heard before, somewhere between furious and frightened, and the thing about that combination is that frightened people are often more honest than furious ones. "What did you do?" he said. "I untangled my finances." "You had a lawyer send letters to a bank?" "Yes, to your own family, to accounts I didn't knowingly share, and to obligations I didn't fully understand." "Yes, this is Claire. Do you understand what this looks like?" "I understand exactly what it looks like," I said. "I finally do." He was silent for a moment. Then, "Derek is going to lose his car." "I know. And the apartment he was looking at." "Dad." I said it gently. "Derek is 30 years old. He has a college degree and a work history. He is fully capable of having a difficult season and coming through it. What he has not been allowed to have is the experience of facing consequences. Every time consequences came close, someone stepped in. I stepped in. I'm not doing it anymore. You're punishing him." "I'm not. I'm just not protecting him from his own choices. Those are different things." I heard my father sit down somewhere on his end of the line, the slight settling sound of a chair taking weight. "He doesn't handle things well when he's under pressure," he said, and his voice had changed. Some of the authority had left it. He sounded, for the first time in a long time, like someone who was genuinely worried rather than someone who was managing a situation. "I know," I said. "That's actually what concerns me most. And that's why I told him I'd pay for a financial counselor and a therapist. That offer stands. That's real help. That's the kind of help that might actually change something." "He won't go." "Maybe not. But it's what I'm able to offer." My father didn't call back that day. Or the next. Sandra sent one text that said, "I hope you know what you're doing," which I chose to interpret as sincere. The family group chat, which usually ran about a dozen messages a day about nothing in particular, went silent. 3 weeks after the birthday dinner, my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. I picked up. It was my Aunt Renee, my father's younger sister, the one who had nodded along at the dinner table when my father made his announcement. She was calling from her cell phone, not the number I had for her, and she asked immediately if I was alone. "I am," I said. "I wanted to call privately," she said, "because I don't want this to get back to your father." She told me she had known, for most of Derek's adult life, that I had been carrying him. She said she had watched it happen and had said nothing because it wasn't her business, and because your father has a way of making people feel like disagreeing with him is an act of aggression. She told me that she was sorry for nodding at the dinner table. She said, "You've been running on empty for a long time." I should have seen it better. I didn't say anything for a moment. Then I said, "Thank you. That actually means a lot." "Your grandmother knows too," Renee said. "She asked me to tell you she's proud of you." She didn't want to say it in a way that would cause more trouble with your father. We talked for 20 minutes, and for most of it I had to work to keep my voice level because Renee's kindness hit a place that anger hadn't been able to reach. Anger had been clean and useful. This was something else. 6 weeks after the dinner, Derek called again. Different from the last time. His voice was flat and tired and absent of strategy. "My car got repossessed," he said. "I heard. Dad said you knew it was going to happen." "I knew it was a possibility." "You could have stopped it." "I know." Silence stretched between us. Then he said, "I don't understand you anymore." "I know that too." I sat down on my couch. "Derek, do you remember what you said to me after Dad's announcement? When you came outside?" "I said I didn't know he was going to do it like that." "Right, but you knew he was going to do it. Which means at some point you called him and told him what you needed and let him decide how to get it from me. You didn't call me yourself. You let him do it in front of 30 people, so I'd be too embarrassed to say no." A long pause. Was that the plan? I asked. Very quietly, he said. I didn't think it through that far. But you knew if you asked me directly, the answer would probably be no. No answer. That's what I've been thinking about, I said. Not whether I love you. I do. Not whether I want things to be okay for you. I genuinely do. But there has been a pattern for a long time where the direct route, the honest route, has been replaced by leverage, by guilt, by embarrassment, by family pressure. And I have been cooperative with that pattern because saying yes was easier than the alternative. I'm done with the easy version. So, what do you want from me? His voice was rough at the edges now. Nothing right now. I want you to deal with what you're dealing with and see what you're actually capable of without someone clearing the path. I think you might surprise yourself. He hung up again. But this time it felt different. Less like a door slamming and more like someone leaving a room because they needed to think. My father came to my apartment on a Sunday afternoon 6 weeks after that. He came alone, which was notable. He rang the bell instead of texting, which was also notable. When I opened the door, he looked like a man who had spent the better part of 2 months arguing with himself and had finally run out of counterarguments. I let him in. Made coffee. We sat at my kitchen table. He told me that the dealership had worked out a payment arrangement with Derek. That Derek had moved into a room in a house with 3 other people, which was not what any of us had envisioned for a 30-year-old man, but which was real and self-sufficient and his own. He told me Derek had called a therapist, 1 session so far, which was not a transformation but was a beginning. He did that himself, my father said. Made the call himself. I know. He texted me. My father nodded. He turned his coffee cup in his hands. I owe you an apology, he said. The words came out with the particular, deliberate weight of someone who has rehearsed them enough to get them right. I made an announcement about your money without your permission. I put you in a position in front of people that you didn't deserve. I have been treating your stability as a resource that belonged to this family, and it doesn't. It's yours. You built it. I didn't say anything. I let it land. I also want to say, he continued, that I didn't know about the account. About what Derek had done with the withdrawals. He met my eyes for the first time. If I had known, I would have put a stop to it. I believe you, I said. And I did. My father was a man who made a lot of wrong choices. But stealing had never been one of his characteristics. I don't think you knew. I should have known more than I did. About all of it. We sat quietly for a while. Outside, the afternoon light was going flat the way it does in late November, that gray gold that makes everything look like a photograph of itself. I'm not going to be the safety net anymore, I said. That's not cruelty. It's just the truth. I need you to understand that going forward and not try to renegotiate it in a year when things get hard again. I understand. And if there's ever another announcement, I said, keeping my voice even, about my money, my credit, my name on anything in front of anyone, I will leave and I won't come back. Not in anger. Just because we'll both know. At that point, that nothing has changed. My father looked at his coffee. He nodded slowly. That's fair, he said. He stayed another hour. We talked about other things. His garden. The project he'd been putting off. A book he was reading. Small things. The ordinary texture of 2 people who share history and are trying to find the version of it that doesn't require anyone to sacrifice themselves. When he left, he hugged me at the door, and I let him, and I meant it. I spent that evening alone in my apartment with the lights low and music I liked on the speaker in the kitchen. I poured a glass of wine and sat on the floor against the couch the way I used to sit when I was in college, and I thought about the $93,000, not with bitterness anymore, just as information. A number attached to a chapter. A chapter that was finished. I had not gotten the money back. I was not naive enough to believe I ever would. But I had gotten something back that was worth considerably more, though it took me longer to find the words for it. What I had gotten back was the understanding that my resources, my time, my financial security, my name, were mine. Not a shared account, not a family utility, mine. I had built them with 10 years of 70-hour weeks and deferred vacations and choices that were invisible to everyone around me, precisely because I had made them so quietly. My generosity had been real. I didn't want to erase it. But it had stopped being generosity somewhere along the way and had become expectation, and expectation had become infrastructure, and nobody builds their life on infrastructure they didn't choose. I raised my glass to nobody in particular. Not in triumph, not in anger, not even entirely in relief. Just in acknowledgement of everything it had taken to get here, of everything I was no longer willing to carry, of the particular, hard-won quiet of a life that finally belonged to the person living it. Outside, the city moved the way cities do, indifferent and constant and full of its own noise. I sat in mine for a long time, not needing it to be louder or softer or anything other than what it was. For the first time in years, that was enough.